Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In today's episode, I spoke with a highly regarded legal career consultant who shared with me her passion to coach attorneys to be authentic, to develop their personal brand for who they truly are, and learn how to articulate their value to employers, coworkers, colleagues, and clients. You don't want to miss this. Just a reminder, the PDF transcript of this audio is available to download. Go to liongroup.recruiting.com/podcast. As many of you know, we interview corporate defense, law firm leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You are listening to episode 36 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Shauna Bryce, founder and principal of Bryce Legal. Shauna brings more than 20 years in the legal industry with legal hiring and is a nationally recognized expert in professional development, career transition, social media, and resumes for lawyers. She's a former practicing attorney and a member of an Am Law 200 firm and the hiring committee. Shauna has worked for some of the nation's top attorneys at places like the Global 100 law firms and companies, Google, DreamWorks, Major League Baseball, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the White House. Shauna received her degrees from the Harvard Law School and the Johns Hopkins University. Shauna, welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'm really happy to be here.
Shauna, I'd actually like to just begin by getting an overview of what led you to be a lawyer, a little bit of your journey as a lawyer, where you were at, and then what led you to start Bryce Legal.
Well, for me, it was a pretty organic journey. I did the traditional route of going straight from high school to college to law school. I didn't have a lot of lawyer models at that time. I had a few, but not a ton. So I wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do with my law degree when I went to law school. I was very fortunate, though, to go to school during a very good economy when it didn't matter so much because you knew that there would be a lot of options when you graduated. So I went to Harvard Law School, and when I graduated, I started at Paul Weiss in Manhattan and pretty quickly moved out into New Jersey, where I was at another law firm. I also practiced in-house. And over time, I was on partnership track back at the law firm. One of the areas I was involved in pretty heavily at the law firm was, as you mentioned, the hiring committee. And I also just sort of became the office therapist. So even as an associate, I had lawyers of all levels, including partners, coming into my office, talking with me about what their experiences were and how they could better deal with developing their careers, how they could better deal with office politics and other parts of their legal practice. And so when I decided I really didn't want to be a law firm partner, it was a very natural thing for me to go into the coaching side. So I started coaching way back when there actually weren't tons of people doing it. And you still had to explain to people what a coach did and what a resume writer did and what branding was.
Shauna, did you get additional training as a coach, or just it kind of came naturally to you?
Well, both. I did do some industry certifications in writing and coaching, but I also rely heavily on the experiences that I had on the hiring side. I like to bring the hiring perspective to branding, writing, and coaching. And I have also spent years interviewing legal recruiters, GCs, law firm partners, and other people in the hiring process about what their preferences are, what they see happening, what their trends are, what their problems have been in hires, what they look for. and things like that. So it's a combination of additional training and certifications, my own experience on the hiring side and on the practice side, and then my continuing research with all sorts of folks on the hiring side and the leadership side.
Yeah. And was there a moment in your career that made all the lights turn on and maybe someone or the firm you're working for said, you really should go do this, or you were retained, or like a significant attorney that said, I really need your help, and the lights turned on, you said, okay, I need to stop practicing law and I need to start Bryce Legal?
Right. I did have that happen. Some of the people who came into my office, like I said, including partners, they would come in, shut the door, sit down. They'd be in my office for an hour talking to me, and they would say, you should really do this for a living. This was great. I learned so much. Or this was like therapy. You should really do this. And so, yeah, when I stepped off partnership track, it was a very natural thing for me to do. And I'm fortunate that it worked out well. I'm fortunate to be in a position where I really love what I do and I'm good at it. So it's a wonderful combination for me.
Yeah. And so just please take a moment and explain to my audience, if someone were to approach you, why would they approach you? What do you offer? That sort of thing.
So I have lawyers approaching a lot of different stages. I work with lawyers who either want to practice law or leverage their law degree in some way. And that can be any stage. We work with law students who are looking to get that first job. We also work with retiring GCs or people who are looking to downshift. So it's really throughout the career life cycle. Most of my clients are between 10 and 30 or 25 years of practice, and they're executive track or executive level or higher. So, but it's really all of the career life cycle. I work with thinking through career decision making when somebody wants to make a transition, whether it's a straightforward lateral transition or whether it may be a more dramatic transition. A lot of times it's a transition like going from law firm in-house, and we work through the decision-making process. We work on branding. We work on resume writing, LinkedIn profiles. I do the whole gamut, pretty much everything but placement.
When we were discussing things you're passionate about and what you're dealing with right now with your clients, you talked about this notion of looking beyond just the tasks attorneys are doing. Would you share with my audience kind of your heart around this subject?
Yeah, so I find that this is an issue that I deal with daily and work with lawyers on really a daily basis. A lot of lawyers, when they put together the materials and they think about what they do, they have a tendency to focus on the task that they did. So what ends up happening is you have LinkedIn profiles that are interchangeable, you have resumes that are interchangeable, you have people interviewing in ways that are interchangeable. And lawyers feel like my LinkedIn profile doesn't really reflect what I bring to the table, neither does my resume, and it's because they tend to focus on the task. And by tasks, I mean things like I write contracts, I put together the deal documents, or I put together an internal policy. They think about the contract, and they write heavily about the contract. And talk heavily about that part of their work. What they tend to leave out, though, is the part that is more interesting to employers and hiring people, and that is the context of the work and why it was important. Right? So they may tell you the name of the law firm that they worked at without telling you whether it was a 5-person law firm or a 500-lawyer law firm, without telling you what their typical client looked like, without telling you how big those contracts were or what the industries were or what the issues were that the clients were facing. They tend to gloss over all of that. And what I find is that for employers and for recruiters, often what they are truly looking for is the context. They want to make sure that the lawyers that they bring in understand their business, understand the industry, understand the competition, their end users, customers, their market pressures, revenue drivers. things like that. And when lawyers leave out all of that information from their thought process and from their branding, they are missing an opportunity to really showcase what they do.
Can you share what's been happening to this either current or like old notion of a document we call a resume dictating who the attorneys are? What has changed? And what are some of the mistakes attorneys are making when they're writing their resumes?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that has changed is the existence of LinkedIn and the dominance of applicant tracking systems. When that happens, you have this focus on what people call keywords and this focus on tasks. And candidates see these keywords and they hear about resume keywords and they think that the resume has to be all about making sure that I put in these keywords so I can get past an applicant tracking system. And I find that for most lawyers, that is steering them in the wrong direction because it's putting emphasis, again, on the wrong thing. It puts the emphasis on the tasks that they do and not the context that they do it. I also find that for most lawyers, applicant tracking systems are really not the way to go for finding your next employment. So some of the numbers that I've seen are that fewer than 15% of jobs are filled through job ads and that 80 to 85% of job opportunities are never advertised at all. And when you put those two things together, you can see that lawyers who are focused primarily on job ads and getting through an applicant tracking system are doing themselves a disservice. So one of the things that I work with lawyers a lot is, especially senior lawyers, is telling their story, talking about the value that they bring, and really positioning themselves to become targets of acquisition through a platform like LinkedIn. So we think about building out a presentation that is truly authentic to them, that it's not a generic thing, that, you could swap out anybody's name, but something that is true to them, true to what they bring to the table, and is designed to help attract internal recruiters, retained recruiters, contingency recruiters, clients, and leadership opportunities.
So you tend to work with lots of attorneys and executives who are legal executives through transition. Let's talk about one of those transitions right now. It's this notion of coming back and forth from work. So maybe someone has had a personal hiatus from work. I mean, the classic story is the mom who was in, a large law firm who has had a child and was on maternity leave and decided to stay home for a while, an extended period of time and come back. There's probably some other transitions you've seen, but what advice would you give attorneys who are entertaining that kind of transition from a life situation?
So you're right, there are a lot of different types of transitions. I certainly think that, as you mentioned, the caregiver one is a very common one, but other times people have gone through a change of leadership or a corporate reorganization and they take a package, and so that they have a gap on their resume or in their experience because of that. I think one of the things that I see a lot with lawyers is they tend to be really afraid of having this gap in their experience. Sometimes they try to cover it up, sometimes, which has limited success, right? So they tend to be really afraid of it. And I think that there are a couple ways that you can think about it, and it depends on, of course, the circumstances for this transition back into practice. It depends on how long you've been gone. But there are a lot of different ways to look at it and ways that you can embrace it as part of your story instead of being very fearful of it. I think one thing that I would really encourage people to do if they've had a break from law practice and are looking to come back is to really reconnect with their professional and personal networks before they start looking for a job, and to look forward about what it is that they want to do next, what sort of role they want to go into, so that they can begin to prepare for that role and show employers that they're serious about coming back into the workforce, and that if they're hired, they're going to stick.
Another transition, I would love your feedback, especially since you're right there on the Hill. What advice would you give this notion of going back and forth from government? I mean, every time we have a regime change, a new president, they have a favorite law firm and kind of tends to pull attorneys out. Or when one president leaves, a lot of that administration goes back into law firms, as we've seen. I think it's Eric Holder went to Covington, back to Covington. And so what advice would you give attorneys who are entertaining that notion of either going into government or coming out of government back into maybe private practice or in-house?
I think it's a wonderful thing, and it's a very common thing in the DC area and even the East Coast area of people going back and forth, as you said, between private practice and government service. One of the things that I found is that for a lot of law firms with particular practice areas, there's even preference for people doing that. So, for example, law firms that have strong SEC compliance practices, strong anti-bribery, anti-corruption practices, or FCPA practices, strong white-collar crime practices, they will often prefer hiring lawyers who have had some government service. So they're looking for people who had been in U.S. attorneys' offices or who had been on regulatory enforcement side. So for a lot of people, government service can be a huge draw and a huge plus for their private practice careers. And likewise, government often appreciates some experience in the private sector and can hire people in. So I see a lot of people go back and forth between the two really successfully, where they can market to clients and, again, whether internal or external clients, that their understanding of different stakeholders and having sat in different seats around the table is an asset for those clients, right? Because it brings a much more well-rounded perspective to the issues that they work on.
Shauna, let's talk about the realities of succession planning as general counsel are looking to retire and wondering what to do with their life. Law partners doing the same. What kind of advice are you giving attorneys who are, so I chuckle because I think of attorneys being one of the few professions that will do it until, into their 80s or 90s if they could, and many do. But what are you finding as attorneys tend to be working later into their life? What kind of advice are you providing them?
Well, interestingly, one of the first things I talk to them about is their finances. I'm certainly not a financial advisor, but I do recommend that they seriously go through their finances and figure out what their assets are, what their retirement plans are, what their expenditures are and their financial obligations are well before they approach retirement, because the truth is we all have our own financial realities to deal with, and those financial realities can influence our career decision-making quite a bit, including the decision of when to retire, how to retire, where to retire. And so that's really ends up being the starting point. One of the things that I found as I talk to lawyers who are looking to downshift or retire is they often, as they go back and do the math, realize that they didn't plan for retirement the way they thought they had, and that they need to change one of those variables, right? Which may mean moving, it may mean selling a house, it may mean pushing retirement off, or it may mean that they can't do a full retirement. They need to semi-retire because they are still going to need some income. So the reality is that sometimes career decision-making starts with your financial reality.
Shauna, you had brought up law students, and I know there's been a lot of changes to the legal industry over the years and what could be a reduction of law students. What advice are you giving, or what would be some of your top pieces for law students as they're entering into a legal industry that's changing as we speak?
Yeah, so there have been quite a number of changes. And I think, for most law students, we're no longer in an era of having multiple offers when you graduate for law school. And of course, it's been a long time since most law students experience that. One of the things I find that law students really want to think about is not just limiting themselves to law firms or even to government and other traditional practice of law roles, but to look at other roles. There are a lot of roles out there where there are more jobs, where the JD is an advantage, where legal experience can be an advantage, and that the pay is good and there are career opportunities that don't preclude you going back to practice law later. So some of those roles may be in some of the big four management consulting firms. There's a lot of compliance sort of roles in there. There are a lot of law-related roles there. There can be good roles on the legal tech side. Some of them can be project management sort of roles, but they are law-related where you'll be working closely with law firms and your understanding of law can be an asset. So I've had a number of lawyers who were impacted from the recession and the contraction legal market then switch over into legal tech. Sometimes they're in an e-discovery vendor and they're working on the development of new technologies. They're working on, as I said, the actual project management. They can be working on different sorts of law-related issues there. So I would say don't limit yourself to looking only at law firms and saying, if I didn't get a job at a law firm, then there's nothing for me and there's no way for me to use my law degree. There are so many other opportunities out there. You just have to take a step back and be more creative in your thinking of them and more open-minded. There are also lots of jobs in areas like policy development, in economic justice, in lobbying, in government affairs. There are other sorts of roles out there that can be really satisfying to people. And like I said, it can help you continue to build a law-related career.
Shauna, you are, and I am approached by numerous very skilled attorneys who are kind of working up the ladder and making it their career goal to be a general counsel one day. What's your advice to them, or what would be a takeaway for them as they consider that?
I think it goes back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is to really understand the business or the client, but really understand the business that you're looking at. You want to have this understanding not just of those technical legal issues, but to take a step back and say, let me research this industry, understand the history and trends in the industry, understand different sorts of business models, understand business drivers and how to talk to business people, not just, legalese, focus on plain English advice, develop a really holistic understanding of the types of businesses where you would want to be a GC, because those GC roles really require that. And the earlier lawyers take an interest in the businesses that they're serving, the better that they will do on that GC track. I would say get involved in cross-functional committees, take advantage of opportunities to meet those different sources in internal stakeholders and executives, whether it's business units or other functions.
And then kind of finally on the professional side of questions, I'm sure you've come across general counsel who have kind of reached the zenith of their position at their company and find themselves using a 4-letter word that I tend to hear my kids say lots of times. I'm bored and I am needing the next adventure. I want to take on a new challenge. I'm bored. I'm not challenged anymore. What advice would you give them, Shauna? And do you find that as well?
I have found that as well. And I find that sometimes those GCs shift into other roles. Like they may shift into business development. They may shift into like a COO role. Even a CEO role. I also find that a lot of times, if they feel like they're in their career where they're past wanting to be even in the C-suite at all or a senior leadership team kind of job where they have primary responsibility, that they can also be involved being on boards. I find a lot of GCs love being involved in boards, not just nonprofit boards, but being involved in boards of startups where their experience is really valued and they don't have to do all of the work. So it's an opportunity for them to mentor business people, help a business develop, help it position itself without working 60 hours a week. So let's look at those sort of opportunities.
And you bring up a really good point. Do you know how, or have you given others or open doors for them on how to get on boards of companies or nonprofits?
Yeah, so there again, it starts with thinking about how you're going to position yourself. And there are other sorts of ways to do it as well. So there are some boardroom pipeline organizations where people can get involved, get training on how to be a board member, get formal training on how to land that first board gig. We do positioning and coaching on that as well, but there are so many really good formal pipeline programs that I have sometimes recommended clients do those. Some of it's networking, some of it's being in the right place at the right time. Some of it goes back to simply being able to be found, which is one of the benefits of being on a platform like LinkedIn, is it simply is a way for people to find you. And if you're clear that you're open to those opportunities, then that's a way to attract them as well.
That's excellent. Shauna, as I customarily do on my shows, let's transition to family or to a more personal life. I understand that you married a lawyer. Is that correct?
I did. I met my husband in law school. He was actually one of the first people I met when I got on campus. So I've known him since August of 93, and we've been together since 1994.
That's awesome. So first impression lasted a while.
Yes. Although I think one of the things that's funny is if you had asked us back when we met if we would have ever even dated, I think we both would have said no. So, but I think it's one of the tributes to marrying somebody who is your best friend.
Yeah.
We were friends first.
And you had also shared that there was something powerful about an attorney marrying an attorney, and I tend to see it happening all the time. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think non-attorneys, when they find out that I'm married to another lawyer, they think, I can't imagine two lawyers being married. You must argue all the time. Said, I'm like, no, that's not what lawyers do. And I find for us, it's really the opposite. It is wonderful to have somebody who truly knows the pressures that lawyers are under. And my husband has worked in a variety of environments too. So law firm, government, and now he's in a consulting firm. So it is nice to have somebody who understands those different sorts of pressures that lawyers face. Anything from doing the technical work to client development and building a book of business, partnership run, all of that. And to have somebody that you can actually talk to about it who is going to understand. Even having somebody who truly understands when you do have to cancel something last minute. I'll say on a personal note, it's also lovely to have somebody you can sit down and do a logical risk-benefit analysis with. When you're making decisions, that is a really wonderful thing. My husband and I both tend to be analytical people, and we like data-driven decisions. So we find that works really well for us to be able to sit down and talk something through without it turning into something that's personal or without it being an argument. And it's nice to have somebody that you can just say, you know what, honey, I am just having a bad day. Yeah. So I'm just going to go in my office for an hour or two. And that person will say, you know what, I've been there and I can respect that. Yeah. Right. And somebody who you can celebrate your wins with too. So yeah, it's been wonderful for us.
It sounds like you two have an adventurous spirit. Can you share a little bit more about that?
We do. We really like to travel. So we have been, I don't even know how many countries now. And we recently got an investment property in Panama, a dual citizen. So I will be setting up an office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to doing that. Yeah. So I will have a very small but multinational practice.
That's excellent. And you have a fondness for reading. Do I understand that correct?
I do. I am from a family of teachers and professors and librarians and lawyers. So I think I inherited the book-loving gene early. So yeah, I'm a big reader. I've fallen off that wagon recently. And so I've been working hard to carve that space out again in my schedule because it's something that I miss doing for myself, to read things that aren't news and don't relate to work.
What's been your strategy to make time for that?
So recently I have started blocking off time on my calendar. It's recurring time, and I've created different blocks, some of which are now actually labeled off-grid or out of office, nice. Where I am not even allowed to be in my office, and I'm not allowed to be on my phone unless it's a genuine emergency, because I realize that sometimes emergencies actually do happen. As much as we like to say, turn off everything, sometimes that's not practical. But I do try to have that in my calendar as protected time so that I have permission, even for myself, to say, no, this is my downtime. This 2-hour block is when I'm going to go sit in a park with a book or take a nap or do whatever I want to do, without any sense of, oh, wait, you really should be doing something else. Mm-hmm. So I've created that sort of time in my calendar and really tried to lock it in. And as I said, there are times when it doesn't happen the way that I've planned or hoped, but then what I do with that block of time, instead of just deleting it in my calendar or letting it be overridden, I move it to another day to preserve that time.
Excellent. And then, as every episode I do this, would you mind recommending some books that you're reading or enjoying, or some that my audience can look into?
So I think 2 books that are always close to my heart when somebody asks about reading books are The Handmaid's Tale, which, of course, now has a series about it. It's one of those books I first read probably in college, and it has always stuck with me. And, of course, with the current events, the book has found a resurgence, and as I said, it's been turned into the series. And I understand there's a sequel coming out, so I'm looking forward to that.
That's excellent.
The other book that has always been just really close to my heart, one of my go-to books, has been Watership Down, which I think I first read in either elementary school or junior high, so it's been quite some time ago. And I'm sure I have read it more than a dozen times. It's a story that has always, for me, had a lot of heart to it and a lot about the human spirit. And I know some people love the book and some people write it off as a children's book, but it's always been really dear to me. And I find that every time I read it, I come back to it with a little bit different perspective and see something in it that I hadn't seen before.
Shauna, last question. If you were to go back in time and meet a historical figure, who would you want to meet and why?
Oh, wow. That is such an interesting question. And I guess it's always hard to come up with just a single person. I'm not sure, Chris, on that one. I'm going to have to think to find one person.
Is there a certain era that would interest you more than others?
Wow, I feel like my mind is just racing through the possibilities.
Yeah.
There are so many options there.
And there's no wrong answer. Throw out one.
It's interesting because I realized that these are actually cliched answers that I'm going to give, which would be to meet people like Gandhi, to meet people like Martin Luther King Jr. And for me, one of the reasons that they come to mind now is I simply would love to know how they persevered, given the odds that were against them and the hostility that they faced. I feel like we're in a time now where there's so much hostility, there's so much incivility, and to see people like that who persevered, that's something that I would love to ask them about, how they got up every day to continue working towards the goal that they saw.
Shauna, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you have questions or would like to recommend someone to be on the podcast, please email them to podcast@findthelions.com. If you like this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. Also, share our podcast via email or social media. To share our podcast, listen to more shows, or to read the transcription of this audio, go to liongrouprerecruiting.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.